Good evening, everybody, and you're listening to Hall Monitor on WPPM. In case you don't know this, and I'm hoping that our listeners and viewers don't fit into that category, we have an election coming up. In fact, on October 8th, when you can start getting your mail-in ballots to vote for this year's general election, which includes the governor's race, Senate races, and 4 special election city council seats that are coming up. So we wanted to bring on somebody who knows more than a little bit about the voting process, how you should get involved in it, and can possibly help you connect with that voter registration that you haven't made yet. We have Kadida Kenner. She is the executive director of the New Pennsylvania Project. And we thank you for your time, Kadida.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
So I guess my first question for you is, as somebody who pays attention to voter registration and voting rights and things like that here in the Commonwealth, what are you seeing as we approach the November elections?
It's been raining here in the local area for the last several days, which has caused me a little anxiety, because when I see the rain, I think about what possibly could happen on November 8th if it rains on that day, and how that could impact voter turnout. So it has only strengthened my resolve right now to make sure that we are engaging every single person who is unregistered to vote in this moment, getting them registered to vote, engaging those who are infrequent voters, those who may have given up on the political process, maybe cast a ballot in 2008 for the first Black president and haven't cast another one since. And I think about those folks, and I think about, how do we get them to the polls to cast a ballot in whatever weather it may be, in the current climate that we're in here, not only in the Commonwealth, but across the country. And so we know we need record turnout in this 2022 election if we are going to see changes, positive changes made in our lives, in our daily lives. So I'm concerned about voter turnout. As much as I've been concerned as a voting rights organization that does primarily work around voter registration, concerned about the fact that there are 1.7 million Pennsylvanians who are eligible to vote and not registered in this moment. So I have a little anxiety in this moment. I'm hoping that we get the turnout that we need to make sure that we can get our lives changed for the better.
Now, so much has changed in terms of what you can do and what you can't do in terms of registering voters. Most notably, in 2008, you had, I guess, what we'll call the Acorn scandal, which really shouldn't have been a scandal. And a lot of nonprofits like yours that go around registering people to vote, there's things that you all have had to do to negotiate some of these changes in voter registration law. How have you managed to do that? And in terms of places around the nation with these restrictions, where does Pennsylvania fall? Is it heavily restricted? Is it lightly restricted? Is it not restricted at all?
Luckily for us here in Pennsylvania, the laws are not as restrictive as other places. I think about places like Florida, where it's super restrictive to the point that organizations that have previously done voter registration, although they can again choose not to, just because all of the restrictions that have been placed on them. So here in Pennsylvania, not as many restrictions. I think this is where we're a little more progressive than other states. Also more progressive in the fact that we can register the formerly incarcerated the moment that their feet hit the street. So I think here in Pennsylvania, we have an opportunity to get folks registered to vote. And I think for organizations like ours, which is, really new, right? We're only a little over 1 year old as an organization. We take a lot of pride in the registration work that we're doing. There's a lot of integrity that goes on behind the scenes in order for us to do this the right way. There's a lot of people who are looking for us. We want to make sure that we are following the rules, that we are doing this with a lot of integrity. And we are. I'm super proud of our team. We are going into communities, meeting people where they are. We are giving them factual information so that they will make the best decisions for themselves. Hopefully that decision is becoming a registered voter or re-registering to vote, or, changing their address if that's what needs to be done when we knock on their door. We are making sure that everyone that we register to vote gets a follow-up phone call from us. We want to make sure that we just didn't have them fill out a form for filling out a form's sake. We want to make sure that form turned into a voter registration card. And if that means we need to follow up with the Board of Elections, if we need to follow up with the Department of State, we are reaching out and telling them our concerns if we are experiencing them as we're trying to register voters all across the Commonwealth. So I think for us as an organization, very proud of the work that we're doing with integrity to make sure that we are not only just getting forms filled out, but turning these into voter registration forms for those who are eligible to vote, and making sure that they can actually then get to the polls or use a vote by mail ballot, which is still legal here in Pennsylvania. It is the law of the land, and that they have all of their options are available to them, and in terms of and the ways in which they need to cast a ballot, which is the most comfortable and accessible for them. It's all about accessibility. So in terms of other other states and how what their laws are, I think about North Carolina. I did voter registration in North Carolina. The formerly incarcerated had to pay all their fees and fines before they're eligible to vote. I think about some other states that have more strict rules on having young folks get registered to vote. Here in Pennsylvania, if you're going to turn 18 years old by November 8th, you can register to vote today. You do not need to wait. You can register to vote today. So I'll give Pennsylvania a shout out for being more progressive in our voter registration guidelines.
Now, you mentioned formerly incarcerated people. And I remember a couple of years ago in Florida, they had a referendum where the populace voted to allow formerly incarcerated people to have their right to vote restored without having to go through the governor and all the other stuff that they have to go through now in order to do it. And basically, the state has chosen to ignore the will of the people on this. In terms of Pennsylvania, and I think this is important for us to kind of make sure that people understand, if you are not convicted of a crime, if you are in jail and you are waiting for bail and you can actually vote unless you are convicted of a crime. Is that correct?
Absolutely. That is actual factual information, right? So if you have not been convicted of a crime, you are eligible to vote. You have the franchise. You are not disenfranchised. Not only that, but some folks who are incarcerated for misdemeanors also have the ability to vote. And so it's really important that we get that message out there. I think that disinformation or misinformation that reaches the formerly incarcerated carries over. It used to be a time in Pennsylvania where you had to wait several years before you could join the electorate after being released. That has passed. That's been passed for many years. And there is disinformation, misinformation that is reaching the formerly incarcerated community that makes them believe that they are not eligible to vote, and those who are currently incarcerated waiting for determination about their case are still eligible to vote. And so I think that's so important that people that are listening today hear that. I can't tell you how many times we have registered someone who's formerly incarcerated who thought they couldn't vote. And when we show them the back of the voter registration form that lays out exactly what their rights are in terms of registering to vote here in the Commonwealth, they're so excited and they're grateful that they're getting the accurate information. And it's a great day, and we celebrate with them when we get them registered to vote.
Now, we have an election coming up. October 24th is the last day you can register to vote in Pennsylvania. But we have an election coming up, and in Philadelphia in particular, because we have a whole bunch of people that are starting the mayor's race now. There are 4 special elections that we're going to be having for council seats. Now, there is some concern that because these 4 races have been added, that it might be hard for Pennsylvanians to get their mail-in ballot on time. What are you hearing about this? And do you think that's going to have an impact? These races being added on, is that going to have an impact on whether or not people will be able to get their ballot on time?
So I think there's a few ways in which this will impact our voting. I think number one, I think it's going to help increase turnout in Philadelphia. So I'm in favor of that. If these special elections turn out by 1%, 2%, or 0.5% point, and those who turn out, I'm all for it to get more people engaged. And so those who are running for a special election get to talk to their neighbors about them running for office and wanting them to turn out to vote and then vote all the way up and down the ballot. I'm for that. I think that in Philadelphia, has been success in the vote by mail. People utilizing that, especially when you're someone working 2 and 3 shift jobs and you just do not have time on a Tuesday to get to the polls. I think vote by mail has been very successful for those folks. I think it will continue to be successful. I think that people have until November 1st to request a vote by mail ballot and get that sent to them and returned to either the Board of Elections or through the mail so that it reaches the Board of Elections by Election Day on November 8th. So I'm not so concerned. I think that Philadelphia and the commission will get everything, the Board of Elections will get everything they need to do to get that together so that if those who would like to cast their vote by mail ballot will have availability to do that. What's more concerning is if you're going to take out the drop box locations or make it less accessible for someone to actually drop off their vote by mail ballots. That's always the concern, not just in Philadelphia, but in other counties here across the Commonwealth. So, we're always going to talk about accessibility of the ballot, making sure that those who experience the most barriers in front of them on election day can actually cast a ballot. So I can't say that I'm too concerned about that in this moment. I'm gonna have trust in the system and trust in our Department of State, trust in our Board of Elections and our commissioners to make sure that they are not disenfranchising anybody and making it more difficult to access the ballot. I think if anything, it's going to be good for turnout. And that's what we need to see right now in Philadelphia. We need people to come out. As we know, Philadelphians, the primary election is usually their election. And what reason do you really have to come out in the general election if you cast a ballot in the primary and you have your ballot set for where you want it? But I think in this time to have that special election on the ballot could increase turnout, and I think that's a good thing.
Now, my last question for you. One of the last times I saw you, you were at a gathering at Mother Bethel AME Church regarding Larry Krasner, the current district attorney, and the impeachment effort that's going on against him here in the Commonwealth about saying that he is, kind of like not done his job because of the violence issues here in Philadelphia. But you talked about that as a voting rights issue. Can you elaborate a little bit on that?
Yeah, I absolutely see that as a voting rights issue. Philadelphians, they cast a ballot for him 2 times, and he is duly elected DA of Philadelphia in 2 elections. And I think that if you have outside folks from Jefferson County, Elk County, Center County, who have, no skin in the game here about what's happening in Philadelphia, they should remain out of what's happening in Philadelphia. I think that this is a disenfranchisement issue. You have a lot of Black and brown folks who cast a ballot for Larry Krasner. And so for, leaders in the state legislature from outside of Philadelphia to come in and try to disrupt the duly elected DA and the votes that were cast by Black and brown folks reeks of disenfranchisement to me. And I think this is all part of voter suppression. I think that when you throw the shenanigans, the political shenanigans into this, this gives more people the reason to say, this is why I stay out of politics. This is why I don't vote. This is why I haven't voted since 2008. This is why I haven't voted since 1974, right? You have people who stay out of the electorate for various reasons such as this. They do not see the political system working the way it is supposed to. And I think that is what is going to lead to more suppression of votes of people who just say, you know what, I'm just not going to do this. Or the disenfranchisement, those who say, oh, my vote doesn't count. What's going to be is going to be. That is what we hear at the doors. People don't believe, necessarily, they know that their vote counts in terms of it's being a free and fair election, that it's counting that way, but they just don't see that their vote counts because what is going to happen according to them and what they've seen. And that's exactly how I view this Larry Krasner situation. He was duly elected twice by Philadelphians who put him in that position. And we have outside counties and elected officials coming into Philadelphia, disrupting the Black and brown folks who cast their ballots. We all have the right to cast our ballot, and that is what was done in Philadelphia. I think it's unfortunate, and I think that this is exactly what causes people to be disenfranchised functionally from the system. They just don't think that their voices are being heard, that their vote matters, and what will be will be. But what happened in Philadelphia is that Pennsylvanians voted to vote Larry Krasner in twice.
Okay. Well, thank you. And I'm going to turn this over to Larry McGlynn. You're still listening to Hall Monitor and WPPM. Go ahead, Larry.
Thank you, Denise. And Ms. Kenner, thank you so much for being with us. I can't believe it's been a year already, because we had you on the show, I think the first week you launched. And I feel like I see New Pennsylvania Project everywhere. So it's great to see, and thank you again for being with us. One of the things I'd like to talk about, shifting gears a little bit, part of MPP's mission is economic justice. So can you tell us a little bit about how you're working on that, and what are some of the key issues?
You know, when the New Pennsylvania Project came about, I was working for the Pennsylvania Budget and Policy Center as their director of campaigns. And I had been working alongside folks like John Meyerson and others in Philadelphia who've been advocating to raise the minimum wage in Pennsylvania and Philadelphia for a very long time, realizing that change was not going to happen, that the legislation we were looking to see, that an increase in the minimum wage was not going to happen with the current makeup of the state legislature. Maybe it would, a bump of like 925 would get past the Senate, but would not get past the House. And so that was at a point where it was the realization that something different is going to happen, because the things that we're looking to see happen are not going to be that way with the current makeup of the General Assembly. I think about Philadelphia being one of the only first-class cities with a minimum wage stuck at the federal level of $7.25 an hour. And I think that, if we're going to get economic justice as Pennsylvanians or as Philadelphia, we have to come out in record numbers, and we have to vote for elected officials who are going to raise the minimum wage, that we have to go beyond the federal minimum of $7.25. Denise earlier talked about the violence in Philadelphia. I'm going to throw in the correlation of a very low minimum wage with violence in the streets of Philadelphia. If we can't keep kids, young folks, engaged and working, it's going to be very difficult to keep them off the streets, involved in things they should not be involved in. I think it all starts with economic justice. And I think that is how you can actually start to curb some of the gun violence and all types of violence that we're seeing in the streets of Philadelphia right now. So economic justice is always going to be top of mind. It is the number one issue when we knock on doors and talk to people about what it is that is important to them, or why they have cast a ballot or why they will not cast a ballot. It's usually about that pocketbook issue, about putting food on the table and making sure they have clothes on their kids' back. So economic justice is always going to be top of mind, because it's an issue that is the top of mind of voters.
And you also do some work on school funding. Can you tell us how you're doing that, and what are some of the main issues that we need to focus on here?
Yeah, in terms of school funding, we're not an issue advocacy campaign per se. The work that we do is around the voter rights and the voter registration work. But we have to talk about the issues in order to get people to actually want to join the electorate. And so we talk about fair funding of public schools, K through 12. We talk about funding for higher education as well, because that is what is important to people at the doors. And so when we can knock on a door in Overbrook Park and talk about what the schools look like in Overbrook Park versus crossing City Line Avenue and talking about what the schools look like in Lower Merion, that is connecting the dots for folks. You need to cast a ballot here in Overbrook Park so that you can have the same types of schools as what they have across the street there in Lower Merion. And yes, and schools are unequally funded in everywhere. Even Lower Merion doesn't receive the amount of funding that they need to have adequate education for students. So there's a lot of work. And I know that the legislature, the legislators in Harrisburg have done some work around that in previous months about getting us more equally funded, running things through the fair funding formula and making sure that there's more equitable spending across the board. But we know Pennsylvania, we fund our public schools based upon property tax, and which makes it very difficult for those who live in lower economic neighborhoods to compete with those who live in upper income neighborhoods. So we're always going to talk about that issue as a reason to get people to come out and cast a ballot. You want better schools for your kids? You need to come out and vote for elected officials who are going to make sure that they have an equitable education.
And when you talk to people about this, is the response people's eyes are open now, or is it more like, I knew this, but nobody ever came into my door and said, here's how we change it?
It's a lot of both. I mean, it's a lot. I mean, I can tell you, we've knocked on doors of people who haven't had anyone knock on their doors in almost a decade. You know, we have a list of folks we believe to be unregistered. And so we'll knock on that door looking for John Doe, and John Doe hasn't lived there for 5 or 6 years, or John Doe has been deceased for 5 and 6 years. And so I think it is a lot of neglect on the part of many people to not reach out to all communities, knock on the doors of everyone. I think that there's also opportunities for us as constituents to make sure that the block is registered to vote. If I'm an elected official and I know that this block isn't voting, why would I show up on that block asking for votes if you're not voting, if you're not part of the voting electorate? Why would I need to do anything to make the lives better on this block if this block is not putting me into office or taking me out of office? And so we make sure that we bring this to the forefront of anyone that we talk to, that you need to build power in your neighborhood. You build power in your neighborhood by being consistent voters. So I think that, you know, of the folks that were knocking on doors, yes, they know these issues. They know these issues because they're happening to them. They understand what is happening in their households. They get that, but sometimes a little bit of a touch, just a little bit of civic engagement and education at these doors goes a long way as well. So I think it's a little bit of both there, Larry. I think people understand these issues because they're living them. They understand them better than most of these elected officials do, who are not living these same issues. But for another, you know, for an outside group, as an organization like ours, focusing on Black and brown communities, younger voters, immigrant communities, just to give them a little love and say, you know, we're here, we hear you, we want to listen to your concerns. I think it goes a long way. And I think elected officials and others need to follow suit and knock on all these doors, not just the ones that they think they're going to get a vote from.
So one of the things we hear a lot is, when you go to vote, make a plan. What does that mean to you, and what should people be thinking about before they go to the polls?
Yeah. You know, me personally, I'm always going to vote in person at the polls. As long as my body will allow me to do so, that's what I'm going to do. I see Election Day as a day of celebration. I go there to honor my ancestors. I go there to honor my parents. I go there to get my needs met and to vote for people I believe who are going to work in my best interest. But for others, you know, who have childcare to consider, homework to consider, 2 and 3 shift jobs to consider, the unusual thing that could happen to you. You know, you could get stuck in traffic one day. You know, there's multiple things that could happen to you on Election Day that would stop you from getting to the polls. And so for those folks, you must consider your voting plan. Is it best for me to apply for a vote by mail ballot so that I can take the ballot home, talk about it with my family around the dining room table, Google these elected officials and candidates and find out who it is that's best going to fit my needs and serve my needs? Take your time with it and fill in your circles and then mail that in. If that is what is going to be best for you, because you know that is the life you are leading, that you have very minimal time on a Tuesday in November, right? November 8th, Tuesday is not just accessible for all folks. So always grateful for Act 77 and the opportunities that we have now in Pennsylvania to be able to cast a ballot by mail. So yes, you need a voting plan. You also have to plan for the unexpected. Unexpected things happen on Election Day. You could get called into your job to work an additional shift. You know, your car could break down. You may not have access to the polls. So think about all the things that could happen in your life and make a voting plan. And not only just for yourself, but for the ones that you love as well. Check in on your parents. What's going on with your parents? Are they getting to the polls? Check in on your cousins. Check in on your friends and neighbors. Do they have access to the polls? Do they know that vote by mail is a thing? There's so many ways now that we have access to the ballot, and we need to vote by all means necessary.
All right, I'd like to bring back in Denise Clay Murray here on Philadelphia Hall Monitor.
Yes, and thank you again for sharing some of your time with us, Kadida. I guess my final question for you is, say you have 30 seconds that you've gotten as a donation from somebody to go and say, okay, we're going to give you 30 seconds to do a commercial to tell people why they should make sure that they are registered to vote in Pennsylvania by October 24th. What would that commercial look like? What would you say?
Here's my 30-second elevator pitch.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot at stake in this upcoming election. 2022 is probably the most pivotal election of our lives. We have access to abortion is on the ballot. Voting rights is on the ballot. Economic justice is on the ballot. And so if you would like to see your lives change for the better, if you would like to have elected officials in office who are going to work for you and your concerns and the concerns of your family, you must come out and cast a ballot. You must come out and have your voices heard so that you can get your needs met. There's never going to be a problem with you casting a ballot, right? You're going to be able to cast a ballot, and that's not going to be a bad thing. What can be a bad thing is that you don't cast a ballot. You want to wake up on November 9th and know that you did everything you possibly could to bring change to the lives of yourself and your family. So we ask that you cast a ballot to make sure your needs get met, make sure your voice is heard, and that you build power in your communities.
Well, thank you, Kadida. And I guess I actually have one more question. Because you and I met when we were both journalism students at Temple University. And you started out as a journalist. What has what you learned as a journalist done in terms of what you do now? How has that helped you with this?
So proud graduate of Temple Journalism School. And I've been able to utilize the skills that I learned as a journalist in the work that I do, because as a journalist, we listen to people, right? We listen to people, and then, we gather stories. And that's a lot of what we're doing right now. We are gathering stories of people here in Pennsylvania who have remained out of the electorate or refused to join the electorate for various reasons, and collecting these stories and hearing from people and being able to talk to folks on a level in which they understand has been very helpful in the work that I'm currently doing. I even think that the work that I did in working in retail and in restaurant management has been beneficial to the work that I'm doing right now. This is customer service that we are doing. We are trying to make sure people understand the benefits and features of voting in every single election. And so we're able to give that information out to the broad electorate here, and make sure they understand how important it is, and not only for themselves, but for the lives of those they love. I'm sure there's many people who have those who are eligible to vote here in the Commonwealth. They live here on various status, and they don't have access to the polls the way that you do. And you need to vote for their rights and their freedoms here while they live in this country as well. So I think that the journalism background has been very helpful in helping to collect stories and just listen to what people have to say, and then disseminate the information and give the accurate information. Long live the free press. And thank you, Denise and Larry, for everything that you are doing.
Well, thank you. And that's Kadida Kenner. She is the executive director of the New Pennsylvania Project. Can we get your website so if people want to go to it, they can?
Sure, newpaproject.org. And we are hiring. So if you know anyone who's looking to do this work, let them know. We are hiring people a living wage, paying 100% of your medical, dental, and vision. We need more people to join us in this fight to increase the amount of voters that we have in Pennsylvania. We have to expand the electorate if we are going to expand democracy.
Thank you so much. And you have the website address. If you need a job, you want to help our democracy out, there you go. Thank you so much, Kadida Kenner, Executive Director of the New Pennsylvania Project. And we'll be back with more of Hall Monitor in a moment.